Happy International Workers' Day. It's May Day. It's a holiday that originated in the United States, honored throughout the world, but not very much in the United States. And I tell you what, if anybody has to work on May Day, it's you guys. It's a tough job. Responsibility to and the power to rule on an issue like this, these conflicting things, is a tough job. I don't envy you. They say that size doesn't matter, but I'm here to tell you that there's a world of difference between living next to a 30-foot high structure and a 45 high foot structure. I've always felt sorry to our neighbors south of us on Emory Street who are across from the Central Presbyterian Annex. That building is 27 feet tall, yet it blocks out their afternoon sun, big windows peering into their backyards. And it's just a fact of life. I think they built part of that after I moved in 8 years ago. Gil Everly was a neighbor then. He was the guy that led the Longmont football team to 2 championships in the early 50s. If the realtors get their way, they want to build like 45 feet, stepping up to maybe even 55 feet in this hodgepodge steppy-uppy thing. And I think at that point, our neighbors to the south will feel sorry for us because this is huge. It's going to be, life-changingly huge. We've been running around measuring buildings, and you get a sense of what's the difference that size makes. If you look at the Oddfellows, which is almost 50 feet or 50 feet high, it's just directly west of our house, but it's 400 feet away. Doesn't bother you a bit, but if it's 50 feet away, it makes a huge difference. What the realtors want is 3 stories, and yet they can put their business on 1 story, and that's what they plan on doing. Obviously, they're going to take this top story, but they don't need that space for their own business. What they want to do is probably pay for the project, and they want to have income property. That's a good idea, but from the point of view of the neighbors, the historic East Side, we got 20-foot of alley separating our neighborhood from theirs. That's really very unneighborly, and we really resent it. I'm afraid there's no way around that. And if they get their way, then somebody will be down the road to ask for the same thing. And you guys got to stand the line. You got to really stand up to it. That's what I think. You guys got to represent everybody. Like I say, what you have is a tough job. I wouldn't want it, and thank you for your service.
Thanks, Mr. Fitzgerald. Brian Governson. Did I say that right? Governson? All right. Steve Lane. And if there's somebody who lives at 310 Judson Street, that would be who I meant to say. What? You don't know?
Good evening. My name's Steve Lane. I live at 1013 Neon Forest. I'm actually a local architect here in town. I serve on your Historic Preservation Commission, and more recently was one of the steering committee members for the Downtown Master Plan update. So I have a little bit of different sides of the coin views. I'm actually here to speak in support of what staff has put together in terms of the transition standards. I think that it's really important when we're looking at revising codes to remember that they're based on a vision that has been created. And if there's a vision for how our community and our downtown should grow, it's about looking to what happens in the future, right? And so if our vision is for a much more vibrant downtown that perhaps has more people living downtown, so that avoids some of the traffic concerns and things, so that we have more people that are right there, that are able to access all these great services, and that encourages even more of those services to show up, then that's part of the vision of downtown. And one of the ways that happens is that we have increased heights so that we can have multiple floors and have uses up there. So I think that it's fair to say that, yeah, putting a 55-foot tall building right on that edge would be inappropriate. But I do believe that what staff has come up with is a good compromise that does give some level of transition from the surrounding neighborhoods. And I've actually looked at just a simple study. But for example, on December 21st, the solstice, the angle of the sun at noon is about 26 degrees here in Longmont. So if you project that 26-degree angle out from the base of a house across that step up that the city has, staff has put in the standards, basically that clears. Those steps happen at a point where they don't encroach on that angle. So in other words, that step back that's being proposed would preserve a southern sun on the winter solstice at noon. And actually at 10 o'clock in the morning, it's only 21 degrees, so it's only barely impactful. So yeah, that's one example. There are lots of differences. You can find places in town where, you don't have sun because your neighbor's house or their tree or whatever gets in the way. But as a broad application, I think this is a good start, and I think you should applaud staff for their work. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Carlson.
Mayor Bagley, Council, Robert Carlson. I live at 501 Emory Street. I'm here to urge you to support the issue of the residential commercial compatibility, as happens when these two areas abut each other. In other words, a transition zone. Specifically, consider keeping the height of commercial buildings or development abutting residential neighborhoods to a 35-foot maximum. Buildings in these areas or zones should be compatible both in terms of scale, bulk, size, and height, and should minimize potential impacts on adjacent residential properties. Exceedingly high buildings in the abutting commercial areas will impact residential neighbors' privacy and cast large shadows over their property for a considerable part of the day. A great 40-plus foot wall is not exactly what any of us would like to look at on a daily basis. I'm not certain whether the requirement for graphic shadow shade analyses is in the proposed new code, but it should be if not. Imagine how a massive wall of tall buildings along the east side of Kimbark would impact the neighborhoods to the east, or for that matter, anywhere in the commercial residential neighborhoods abut. So thank you for your consideration of this issue, and hopefully.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Is it Jacqueline Lee? Or Jackie? She's skipping? Okay. All right. Shirley Brunn? All right. John Creighton? He's always got something to say.
Good evening. John Creighton, 328 Pratt Street.
Could we get a restart on the timer? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Creighton.
All right, 328 Pratt Street. I came tonight to advocate for good process. The city staff has spent countless hours gathering input from a wide range of folks across the community, and I think has done a really good job of making recommendations to try to balance all of the competing interests in the community. And believe me, I'm keenly aware of the, particularly around downtown, of the challenges of these issues. My backyard abuts commercial property with no alley in between. And I own commercial space that's next to residential property, and have been trying to work very closely with the residential neighbor with the help of city staff to balance our needs. I think when you get to this point in the process, if the council overturns compromises recommended by the staff, what that sends is a message that process doesn't matter, and that it's better just to try to work behind the scenes and advocate for decisions regardless of the staff's efforts to balance competing needs. So I urge you and hope that you will honor the work that the staff has done to try to balance all of the community's needs and support what's been recommended. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Creighton. Alex Samori. And Sharon O'Leary, you're next. So you're on deck. Grab a bat.
Okay, now I can see you. Mayor Bagley, council members, Alex Samori, 428 Pratt Street. I'm also here tonight to talk about the transition standards as the chair of the DDA. Redevelopment of the downtown core has been a goal of the community for the past 35 years. Both Envision Longmont and the Downtown Master Plan were unanimously adopted by Planning and Zoning and the City Council. The plans encourage density in the Central Business District. It would seem counterproductive to impose more restrictive measures on mixed-use zoning in the Central Business District. What is being presented to you tonight in the Land Development Code update is a solution reached by consensus by the Downtown Residential Advisory Group. This group was formed in response to neighbors' concerns about the code update. The group includes residents from the historic East Side, the historic West Side, downtown residents, city staff, DDA staff, and our consultant, Clarion Associates. Staff researched transition standards in other communities, surrounding communities, and what is included in the draft is the most restrictive of all. The DDA recognizes and appreciates the historic character of the district and its surrounding neighborhoods. It is as important to us as it is to the neighbors to preserve its character while providing the commercial and residential spaces needed to ensure a vibrant future. On behalf of the LDDA board and the 200+ property and business owners that are not here to stand up tonight to be counted, so their voice shouldn't be less important or minimized, I respectfully ask that you support the standards of the draft of the Land Development Code dated April 2018. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Samori. Sharon O'Leary.
Good evening, Mayor Bagley and council members. Sharon O'Leary, 534 Emery Street. I want to first of all thank you for supporting the Planning and Zoning Commission's abilities to update our code. I think it's very important that we take a sharper look at the residential compatibility update. When our city was first designed, it was designed with a downtown surrounded by 3 blocks of residential streets and 3 parks. What outstanding planning. Knowing that together, if you want to build a good community, you have to have a vibrant downtown, but you also have to have a vibrant surrounding neighborhood. And if you give people parks, you'll give them recreation and just one more reason on why they want to stay and homestead here. So this is what makes Longmont, Longmont. This is what makes us stand out differently from our surrounding communities. This is what attracts people to come as visitors or come to buy their new or first home. It's imperative that just along two streets, the east side of Kimbark and the west side of Terry Street, that you just tune your lenses in a little bit differently and look at how can we continue to make this compatible, and how do we transition this so that no one's needs overrides the others, that downtown has no more rights than Longmont residents, and Longmont residents have no more rights than downtown, that we continue to coexist. I would highly stress that you limit the potential for negative impacts on our community by seriously looking at the height commercial buildings along East Kimbark and West Terry Street. If you raise the height, you're going to interfere with people's privacy, their way of life, light, incompatible activities going on, and the dance begins, and there's the slow deterioration, and it becomes us and them. This is not what's made Longmont the great city that it is. It's about compatibility, and it's about equal rights for everybody. When people talk about Longmont, they talk about our historic neighborhoods. They talk about our friendly downtown. They talk about our parades. They talk about the art, and they talk about our parks. So let's continue that movement. It's a symbiotic relationship. We're interdependent on one another. And for downtown to think that they can't prosper and grow without a minimal height restriction on two streets, they're wrong. And I would hate to see the mistake being made. You will not decrease vibrancy or vision by transitioning two streets. I believe true vision comes from finding a transitional height requirement.
Thank you, Ms. O'Leary.
I appreciate your time and effort that you put into our city.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. Let's go ahead and move on to special reports and presentations. Can we have the Longmont Sister Cities folks come up? I believe you have some presentation of student ambassadors.
I do.
All right, great. And as we discussed, if you could stack 9 of these on top of one another.
I'd have to pick the big ones. Good evening, Mayor Bagley and council members. I am Janice Rebin, and I'm the current president of Longmont Sister Cities, and it is my honor and pleasure to introduce you to our 2018 ambassadors who will be visiting Chino, Japan, and Ciudad Guzman, Mexico. We really are grateful for council's continued support of our program and the opportunity for some of our youth to represent their community in a foreign location. So I'm going to start with Mexico and introduce the 2 chaperones. We have Jenny Diaz-Leon and Patricio Ilanes, and they will introduce their delegation.
Thank you for having us tonight. My name is Jennifer Diaz-Leon, and I work for the City of Longmont at Children, Youth, and Families. And I'm very excited to be going along with my fellow trip members here to Ciudad Guzman.
Hi, I'm Patricio Llanes. I work for the Longmont Public Library in the Children and Teen section, as well as in Tars High School and Detention Homes Youth Homeless Runaway Shelter. I'm returning to Chino, Japan this year and very excited to take this group with me. Ciudad Guzman. And very excited to take this amazing group of young men and women with me. And yeah, they're just going to come up and share. I think they know who they are, where they're at school, and why they're excited to represent Longmont.
If you get lost, we'll send someone to get you. Don't worry. I've traveled internationally with Patricio. You're going to be okay.
Hi, I'm Estella Procarpio. I'm in 10th grade and I go to Lyons High School. I do live in Longmont. I am really excited to go to Mexico because I really want to immerse myself in the culture and the language to better understand our neighboring country.
Hi, I'm Mia Novik, and I'm an 8th grader at Westview Middle School. And I'm excited to go to Mexico because I'm excited to meet new people.
Hola, yo estoy Ethan Alstrom. Yo voy whatever. I go to I go to Frederick High School, and I want to go because I'm half Mexican, and I'd like to learn more about my culture and history and stuff. So, yeah.
Hello, my name is Mercer Stotch. I'm an 8th grader at Sunset Middle School, and I look forward to going to Mexico because I'm going to meet people I will be friends with for the rest of my life, and that's thanks to the council's support, so thank you.
Hi, I'm Ryan Bartasek. I go to Longmont High School and I'm in 9th grade. And I'm most excited to experience the culture in Mexico, and I'm really excited about the food. Thank you.
And our delegation to Chino, Japan is led by Hannah Mueller and David Merrill.
Hi, I'm Hannah Mueller. I am a 8th grade science teacher at Sunset Middle School. Good evening and konbanwa. And I am extremely excited to take this lovely group of young people with us to Chino, Japan.
I'm David Merrill. I'm director of bands at Longmont High School. I've been there for 17 years. And last year I took a group of 31 students to Chino, Japan. So I'm very excited to return with this wonderful group. And I'm very appreciative to Mayor Bagley and the city council members for their support with Sister Cities.
Hello, I'm Alina Duino. I'm a sophomore at Erie High School. There's a lot of reasons that I'm excited to go to Japan, but mainly because just experiencing other culture from my own, as well as making friends that I hope to have for a really long time. And I would also like to say thank you for giving us this opportunity and making this all possible for us.
Hi, I'm Alexis Morris. I go to Boulder Prep, and I'm most excited about the food and the culture and being able to have this experience, and I want to thank you for helping us.
Hi, I'm Alexia Merrill, and I'm a junior at Longmont High School. I'm very excited to be going to Chino, Japan, to meet all these new friends, and also I'm very excited about the food, and I would just like to thank you for all your support.
My name is Sophia Josar. I am in 8th grade at Sunset Middle School, and I am so excited to discover the culture as well as the different foods that they have there and meet new people. Also, thank you very much for all the support for this.
Hi, I'm Maria Salter. I go to Niwot High School, and I'm probably most excited to just be in a new environment and meet new people and just learn from the experience.
Hi, I'm Emmett Macias. I go to Longmont High School, and I'm probably most excited just to experience a new culture so intimately. And thank you for providing us with this great opportunity.
So Mayor Bagley or council members, do you have any questions or advice for our ambassadors?
Councilmember Finley. I believe that Councilmember Finley is our liaison. Are you not?
I am the liaison to your group, and I know all you ambassadors this year are going to make us very, very proud. We expect you to behave and have fun at the same time. You will have experiences that you'll never forget and make lifelong friends, and I wish you safe travels, and I look forward to hearing from you when you return.
Mayor Pro Tem Christensen.
I wanted to wish you all a wonderful trip. I was able to go to Chino, Japan a few years ago, and it was life-changing for me. And I wish you all well, and I know that you will learn so much, and it's such a terrific time of your life to be able to soak it all in. So soak it all in.
And I just want to echo those comments. Behave. You represent Longmont. Don't screw up. Have fun, but not too much fun. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right. This is an interesting one. We are not voting tonight on on transition zones and whatnot. We'll be discussing and debating, I'm sure. But we have a proclamation designating May as the Archaeology and Historic Preservation Month in Longmont, Colorado. I thought that was fitting. So, is there anyone here who, all right, great, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and read this proclamation, and then you're going to have an opportunity to say a few things. Great. Whereas historic preservation is an effective tool for revitalizing neighborhoods, fostering local pride, encouraging economic growth, and maintaining community character while enhancing livability. And whereas archaeological and historic preservation is relevant for communities across the nation, both urban and rural, and for Americans of all ages, all walks of life, and all ethnic backgrounds. And whereas it is important to celebrate the role of history in our lives and the contributions made by the dedicated individuals in helping to preserve the tangible aspects of the heritage that has shaped us as a people, and whereas investing in our future by preserving our past is the theme for Archaeological and Historic Preservation Month 2018 in Colorado, and whereas the Historic Preservation Commission supports Archaeological Historic Preservation Month in Longmont for May 2018, I see Paula Fitzgerald is just beaming over there. Now, therefore, I, Brian J. Bagley, Mayor, by virtue of the authority vested in me, and the City Council of the City of Longmont, do hereby proclaim May 2018 as Archaeology and Historic Preservation Month in Longmont, and call upon the residents of our community to join their fellow citizens across the United States in recognizing and participating in this special observance.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. Council members, Karen Bryant. I work in the Planning and Development Services Department. I am the preservation planner for the City of Longmont and the liaison to the Historic Preservation Commission. And I just want to thank you very much for the proclamation. First off, I did not plan the conversation and this proclamation. It just happened,
Sure. Make
so.
it. Yeah, it's all hard, but that's okay.
Sorry. But I did just want to take a moment to talk about. This is a national event. It's not just something here in the state of Colorado. Each state does choose their own theme, and this year, because the state of Colorado, we are looking at reauthorizing our tax credits at the state level. That was the theme that we decided to go with. And I wanted to talk a little just about take a moment to just talk a little about the tax credits. Specifically, the economic impact from the tax credits. I do thank the City Council for supporting the bill that is going through the Colorado State Government at this point, but I did want to let you know that since 2014, when the commercial tax credits went into effect, there has been an economic impact of $17.4 million to the state of Colorado. There have been $170 million in rehabilitation costs. That's resulted in 808 new full-time jobs with $34 million added to the payroll. $13.2 million in total sales tax has been generated through this program. $246 million increase in property value after the rehabilitation of these historic structures. $17.9 million in income generated for property owners, and $36 million spent by owners on additional capital improvements after the initial rehab. Here in the city of Longmont, we have utilized the historic preservation tax credits for the state of Colorado, but we've done so more on the residential side of it, because until very recently, we didn't really have the opportunity. We didn't have a lot of buildings that qualified for the commercial tax credits. With the new downtown national district that was designated in August of 2017, it opened up the opportunity for us to utilize those commercial tax credits. And in fact, since we've had the designation of the downtown, we have had one of the properties utilize the tax credits. And so they were able to receive $46,000 in tax credits through this program. For residential tax credits, which is what the city of Longmont has utilized more, in the past 15 years, the Historic Preservation Commission has approved just under $354,000 in tax credits for our residents to help maintain their historic homes. We are fortunate. The city of Longmont was the first certified local government in the state of Colorado, and because of that, our Historic Preservation Commission can review the residential tax credits, thereby making the process much easier. But just I just wanted to thank you guys for supporting the House bill for the reauthorization of the tax credits, and give you just a little information on what exactly those tax credits mean, not just for the property owners, but just for job creation as well as revenue for the state and taxes that the cities receive, the counties received, and the states receive. So, thank you.
All right, great. I know your staff, but do you want a picture?
I'll skip the picture.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Do you want? No, it's up to. Do you want a picture? I'm thinking we need a picture.
Okay.
I didn't want to force you. Come on, council. And yeah, this is gold, Paula. You don't want to miss this opportunity.
You did the work, Karen. You should get a picture. Or West Side, there again. Thank you.
Ever care about the historic neighborhood in downtown? Come on down.
There you go.
There might be a feeding tall people in the back, shorter ones in the front. Get up there, Joan.
Okay, people, squish in, please.
All right, we have lots of pictures to take tonight. Have another proclamation. This is a proclamation designating May 4th through 6th, 2018 as Community Food Share Food and Fun Drive Weekend in Longmont, Colorado. Whereas, hunger denies dignity, lessens human energy, erodes community and family stability, and impairs the potential of people and societies to achieve. And whereas Community Food Share exists to eliminate hunger in Boulder and Broomfield counties throughout engagement, collaboration, and leadership. And whereas Community Food Share distributed nearly 10 million pounds of nutritious food last year, including 3.6 million pounds distributed in the Longmont area in partnership with 13 Longmont nonprofit organizations. And whereas Longmont citizens are a very generous and compassionate people with a long history of support of Community Food Share in its 37 years of service to our community. And whereas the Times Call, Colorado Hometown Weekly, and King Soopers are the sponsors for the 30th annual Hunger Hurts, the for the 30th annual Hunger Hurts the Whole Community Food and Fun Drive, benefiting Community Food Share from May 4th through May 6th, 2018. Now, therefore, I, Brian J. Bagley, Mayor, by virtue of the authority vested in me and the City Council of the City of Longmont, do hereby proclaim the weekend of May 4th through the 6th, 2018 as, quote, Community Food Share Food and Fun Drive Weekend, end quote, in Longmont. And I invite all citizens in the community to be aware of the vital services that Community Food Share provides to Longmont residents in need and to donate food and funds with a generous spirit. So here to accept the proclamation is Karen Bryant. Oh, no, sorry, not Karen Bryant, Michelle Org.
Thank
Michelle
you,
Org.
thank you. Thank you, Mayor Bagley and Council. I have come to get this proclamation. This is my 4th year now, and this is my first year as a Longmont resident, so I'm very proud.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you, thank you. I really love Longmont and the support that you've provided to Community Food Share. I'm the executive director there, and I really have seen how this community all through Boulder and Broomfield counties has stepped up, and especially Longmont. A lot of our services do, as you mentioned, 3.6 million pounds of our food last year went to Longmont through direct service and through our partner programs. And for the tens of thousands of people that benefit from the generosity of the donations from Longmont and other residents, I really want to thank everyone for all of your support through everything you do. And that's all I have to say.
Well, you're gonna have to get your picture taken.
I will
Hold
have
the
my
proclamation
picture
with
taken,
City
but
Council.
I don't think I'll have as many people with me this
You
year.
know,
I won't
it
make
depends on how high you can stack cans downtown. All right, come on up. Pretty high? 45 feet high?
Okay, my turn. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Hang on 1 second. There's something on my lens. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We're not done yet. We should get little benches up there for council so we can just sit up there. All right. Now we have another proclamation. And Mary Ordzawalski, are you here? All right, come on down. I'm going to start reading this proclamation. You know the drill by now. If you don't, you were sleeping. All right, this is a proclamation designating the month of May 2018 as Stroke Awareness Month in Longmont, Colorado. Whereas stroke is a leading cause of serious long-term disability and the 5th leading cause of death in the United States, killing more than 130,000 people nationwide each year. And whereas every year nearly 800,000 people have a stroke, which means that someone has a stroke every 40 seconds. Stroke can happen to anyone but increases with age. And whereas the FAST, meaning F-A-S-T, warning signs and symptoms of stroke include face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty, and time to call 911. Beyond FAST, additional stroke warnings and symptoms include sudden numbness or weakness of the face, arm, or leg, especially on one side of the body, sudden confusion, trouble speaking or understanding, sudden trouble seeing or trouble walking, dizziness, loss of balance or coordination, and sudden severe headache with no known cause. And whereas the Longmont Stroke Support Group, also known as Stroke Warriors, meets monthly at Longmont United Hospital to provide information and support to stroke survivors, family members, and friends of stroke survivors. Now, therefore, I, Brian J. Bagley, Mayor, by virtue of the authority vested in me and the City Council of the City of Longmont, Colorado, do hereby proclaim May 2018 as Stroke Awareness Month in Longmont and urge all citizens of Longmont to familiarize themselves with the risk factors associated with stroke, recognizing responding quickly to stroke symptoms can save lives, and on first signs of a stroke, dial 911 immediately. So thank you for coming. Do you have something you'd like to say?
I just want to say I've had the pleasure.
Get right up there to the microphone because the paper gets upset. He'll start doing this.
I've had the pleasure of working at Longmont Hospital for over 35 years, and I'm a rehabilitation therapist and occupational therapist. And my love in that job has also been to facilitate the stroke support group. And I just want to thank you and the council because of this proclamation. If even one person now knows the risk factors from a stroke, it can change their life immensely. And so I appreciate so much that you were able to award us this proclamation.
No, well, thank you for your work and for the people who are accompanying you tonight. Do you want to introduce them?
It's a little bit harder for people to come at the last minute. So Shirley helps headed this, and she also helps us with our website to try to get information out and takes pictures for us. Yvonne is amazing, a stroke survivor, and Jackie here is a support person for her sister who had a stroke and are very active in our group. And unfortunately, more people would have come, but a little bit hard at the last minute for them to make it. But I'm sure when I share this at the meeting, they'll all be very grateful.
Well, Shirley, Yvonne, and Jackie, thank you for coming. And now you must come up and get your picture taken with council. Are we doing okay? We don't need a break yet, do we? We can go on to study session items? All right. Let's move on to the update on Civic Center renovation project. The time is yours.
Good evening, Mayor Bagley and members of council. I'm here tonight to give you a brief update on the Civic Center renovation project. And the big news is that construction's starting this month. So tonight I'm going to briefly go through how we got to where we are, talk about the major construction components, and what we can all expect during construction. So the Civic Center complex was built in the mid-1970s, and in 2014 we did a comprehensive analysis of the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and architectural materials that are inherent in these buildings at this complex. And an outcome of that analysis said that we needed to do an in-depth structural evaluation on the slab that is basically the ceiling for the underground parking. And we did 2 stages of that structural evaluation. The first stage was just looking at the plans and doing some computer modeling. The second stage included actual testing, where we exposed wires and beams and really took a deep look and did some x-raying from underneath. And essentially what the conclusion of that structural evaluation told us was that we had broken wires and loose wires that are not pulled tight enough in that slab to give it the overall structural strength that it needs to perform as designed. And while today it's safe to occupy that building, we do need to, in the short term to occupy it, we do need to get on with doing repairs, because when you compare that to what the code requires, it's considered substandard, is the technical term. So this is what we found. Here's some pictures. I think at the time there were a couple of folks, and that second stage evaluation was done in November of 16, and some folks were here on council and some folks saw some of this, and for those that didn't, I wanted to show you some of the things that the other council members saw. So here's where we exposed, and you can see that some of the wires are broken in the slab. That's outside over near the area of where the west steps are. That's where that picture was taken. And then this is in a support beam downstairs underneath, and literally you can take a screwdriver and just move those wires around, and the idea is that they should be pulled tight enough that you shouldn't be able to do that. And so that's what we discovered in some of the beams downstairs. And then at the very ends on the south and west side, we have an anchoring system that holds those wires tight. And this original anchoring system was a new technology, relatively new technology in the mid-70s when it was constructed. And what they found using that specific anchoring system is that it didn't really perform very well, so they abandoned that anchoring system pretty quickly thereafter. But that's what we have in this slab right now. So for those reasons and many others, we need to do this repair work. So just to get yourself oriented so people really know what we're talking about, this is outside coming up the west steps looking south. That patio area is the slab. It supports the buildings, the city manager's office building, the finance area, the admin east area, and it also happens to be the ceiling of the underground parking garage. Those are one and the same. So that's what we're talking about, is shoring that up from underneath and making it last another 50 years. So since about March of last year, we came and gave you the findings of that structural evaluation. We have, we went on and completed our final design with J.R. Harrison Company. We did a pre-qualification of contractors because this is more of a specialized construction work. We pre-qualified contractors. We had 2 contractors pre-qualified in March, and we did a request for proposals from those 2 contractors and did a notice of intent to award. They submitted their proposals to us at the end of March, and we are in the middle of contract negotiations, which we expect to have concluded in the next week. And the contractor that we are in contract negotiations with right now is called Restruction. They've done a lot of work like this around, and they anticipate starting work in the middle of May. And the good news is with this contractor, where they had the best project approach to scope. They have a dedicated public information person that's going to help us communicate with city staff and our residents. They had the shortest timeline, and they had the lowest price. So we got very, very lucky, not only with the contractor that we're going to be working with, but also the engineering firm. They are known nationally to do this kind of work, and they actually wrote the concrete rehab code that everybody else follows. And so people come to them for advice on how to repair buildings. We anticipate construction completion. So the other thing is they also had a shortened schedule. And I know I was advertising a couple of weeks ago that it was going to take about 18 months. Well, they think if they can start in May that they're going to try to be done spring of next year. That assumes that when we get ready to do some of the work outside, which I'm going to talk about later on, that the temperatures will be warm enough to get that completed. But they're going to get in here and they're going to just go after it and get it done, and they're used to doing this type of work. So this is what it's going to look like underneath, and they're going to do all this structural support from underneath in that parking garage, that main parking garage, and those red lines are basically new wires and new tendons. They're going to be attaching to the beams, so they're going to be drilling through some of the concrete beams to attach new tendons, and then they're going to be pulling those tendons tight and making basically shoring that slab up from underneath. And right now the design, the engineer has told us that they anticipate this design is going to last us at least another 50 years for this building. So this part of the building is not the slab. This is what we call the 2-story part, so I just want to clarify that we're not talking about what's going on in this part of the building. Here's another close-up look of what it's going to look like down there. So after they put all of this reinforcement in from underneath, they're going to put a drop ceiling in to protect that area, and so you'll basically just see the ceiling with the lights in it. They also are going to, around some of the beams, spray on a carbon fiber fabric, which also helps to strengthen the beams. So some of the work that's going to happen on the outside, in this same deck area or slab, whatever you want to call it, we're going to have a new concrete overlay that's going to start at the building and slope towards the street, because part of the reason that this slab has gotten compromised is because when it rains, the water sits on top of that concrete and it can penetrate through that concrete slab. So we're going to get positive drainage, and then we're going to coat it. And another thing that's going to happen along out there is, see that brick wall over on the right-hand side of the picture? That's going to come off, and we're going to have an open handrail so that it will allow the water to pass through between the railings and keep that water off of that slab. There are also 2 smaller planters out in this area that we're going to be removing, because that planter per square foot load is pretty high, and we want to just remove them and make sure that the buildings that are on that slab get all of the benefit of this structural repair. So on the west side, as you come up those steps, the 2 planters on either side will be removed as well. We're going to take those steps out, put in new steps. We're going to put in a snow melt system underneath the new concrete that's going to be placed out there, that the full width of those steps, from the steps all the way to the building, so that in the winter when it snows, we can turn that system on and we won't have the water sitting out there, and we just think it'll make it a much better and safer place for the public to come in and out of. And because we're resloping the slab outside, what's going to happen at the face of the building is it's going to need to be built up a little bit, so there's going to be some window and door replacements. So the doors on the west entry will all be replaced and match the concrete that's going to get poured outside. So what does this all mean to people that are going to be coming into this building? So first off, the elevator is still going to be functional. We will have inside the elevator, we'll have it taped off so that they can, and signage that please don't go into the underground parking garage. But for instance, if they do happen to get down there and the doors open up, we're going to have it barricaded off so they can't get into the underground parking area. There's going to be noise when they have to drill through those concrete beams. There's going to be dust. It's going to get smelly when they have to put the overcoating on. The loudest work and the post-tensioning, all of that work is going to be done on the weekends. So we're trying to accommodate some of the loudest work off peak hours for when the public is typically here. That dedicated public information person is going to be giving us regular updates. We're going to have an Outlook calendar that's going to project a month out with regular weekly updates. We're going to have a dedicated email and phone line where people can leave information and concerns and questions. But the big thing is for the duration of the project, there won't be any parking in that main underground parking garage, because that's where we have to do the structural repair. So for those folks that, for instance, tonight are parked down there, in particular city council and staff, what we're proposing to do is, so just to orient yourself here, north is up, Emory Street is to the right, and at the top of the picture there is the ramp, the ramp that you drive down into to turn left and get into the parking garage. There's another underground parking garage immediately east of that right now has our building inspection vehicles in it. And what we're proposing to do is have council move from parking in the main underground parking area over into that first underground parking area. So when you come down the ramp, instead of going clear to the end, you're going to turn into that first left, and those signs that they have set up downstairs will be set up down there, so you'll know which spots are yours, and you can go ahead and park in there. We're also going to have our pool vehicles in that area. We're going to have some of our code enforcement vehicles in there, and our mail delivery vehicle is in there as well.
So it's the parking lot just as you come down the ramp?
Mm-hmm.
To the left?
To the left,
right.
first
Okay.
left, yep. So the other thing that we are assigning to is there's a dock area right outside when you get ready to come down that ramp that's over to the south. That dock area is going to have designated parking for city staff. We've got a couple of spots for some special needs for some staff, as well as people that have a lot of in and out meetings, so that they will have quicker access to and able to get to those meetings. We secured 32 additional parking spaces over in the St. John's parking lot for the duration of this project. I think you all passed that ordinance on the 24th of April. So besides the 47 or so that we have now, we're going to have another 32. There's also on-street parking that whenever I've driven by there, there's been little to no parking there. It's all-day parking along 3rd Avenue between Emory and Collier. So it's one block further east, but there's all-day parking there. So we're hoping between the additional parking that we've secured in St. John's and some of these other areas, that we'll be able to accommodate most of the parking needs here at the Civic Center. And I'm here to answer any questions that y'all might have.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I just noticed when you look at the west side of the building, that's where there are two places for handicap parking, but the one that's right in front of the stairs is right in front of the stairs.
So the access on the west side of the building is not going to be blocked off. Are you talking on Kimbark Street?
Yeah, yes, on
Kimbark.
Kimbark. So the actual handicapped access is the north side of the building by the library, isn't that right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So why do we have handicapped directly in front of the stairs?
Well, so right
as
in
well?
front of the stairs, I don't think there is handicap parking. I think it's further to the north.
Maybe so.
And
Is it? Oh, okay. I never noticed that. All right. Thank you.
All right.
That's good. Okay.
Seeing nobody else, thank you very much. And it sounds like Dr. Waters, you will have 6 months of parking at the least. I mean, at least 6 months of parking after you after they're done. So, do you want to kill your?
Oh,
wait.
yeah.
All right, go ahead, push your button again. All right.
I was being facetious. You could take that little space for Councilman Waters and give it to somebody else. I'll park over in the church parking lot. That's okay.
Well, let the record reflect that Dr. Waters has just given up his parking. All right, thank you very much. Let's move on to the Land Development Code update, since that's probably the item that's bringing out the public tonight. I'm assuming it's not our retreat agenda. What? Did you give me this? That's awesome. Thank you. I'm easily entertained. It's a mental health first aid. I was wondering where that came from.
All right, thank you, Mayor, council members. Brian Schumacher, Planning Development Services. So, council chatted a bit about this topic on April 17th, and we felt that it would be good to come back before we bring back an adoption draft for consideration for council to discuss this topic a little bit further. And so the topic is residential compatibility, or how to have fun and make friends with planning. So, no, seriously, I do appreciate all the discussions that we've had to date, not only with Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council, but all the members of the public, the Downtown Development Authority, representatives and the board. And other interested parties regarding this particular topic. I will say that we spent probably majority of the time with respect to this code update on this one particular topic. So, I mean, I think it's good to have input from the council this evening. And just in terms of just a little bit of background, we're talking about that interface between more intensive and less intensive zoning districts. Typically, it's residential single-family districts adjacent to a mixed-use or non-residential district. And this builds upon our existing residential protection standards that we currently have in the code, but with the interest and emphasis and with the Envision Plan and the Downtown Master Plan about looking at opportunities for additional density or additional building height where it's appropriate, that this residential compatibility section, which is a new section in our code in the draft, kind of builds upon those existing standards. And I'll touch upon that just a little bit more, but not in too much detail. So it addresses compatible uses, building design and massing, building height transition, and other features and operations associated with uses. So in your communication, and the attachment is the draft section of the residential compatibility standards. And I'm not going to touch upon all of these. I think the focus of the discussion this evening is going to be about that height transition discussion, which has been most of the discussion regarding this particular section to date. But in addition to the height transition, it addresses a number of other topics that kind of get at compatible uses and operation of uses and building massing and design. In conjunction with this particular section, in the use regulations chapter 1504, there's also use standards. And this, as I mentioned before, under our current code, we have what's called residential protection standards. And it requires for certain types of uses, and this is just an example list, that there are some separation requirements and or use reviews associated with certain types of uses that are more intensive commercial or non-residential uses when they're nearby residential areas. So there's either a distance separation requirement or there's a requirement that has to go through a conditional use review that would require a public hearing before Planning and Zoning Commission. And then in addition to that, and it's referenced in the residential compatibility section, but there's also standards regarding building design and what's compatible, both in terms of horizontal, vertical articulation in building, quality building materials, four-sided architecture so that you're not staring at a blank wall on the backside of a building. And so this just gives you some examples of that. But here we are, kind of the bulk of the discussion. The residential height transition. So currently, we do not have a standard in the downtown or elsewhere that addresses kind of residential height transition. And as part of this code update, as I mentioned before, with the interest and emphasis on looking at areas for additional building height in our community, we felt it was appropriate to also look at how we transition that height so that it's compatible with adjacent residential areas. And so this was a starting point that we discussed with our code consultant based upon their work in other communities of looking at this distance of 75 feet and 125 feet and, you know, make sure that it matches up in that first 75 feet with the adjacent residential zoning district allowed height. I will say that what's in this draft isn't too far off from what the original starting point was. The difference was, and this is based on some feedback that we received from the Downtown Residential Advisory Group, was that in that 175 to 125, you don't jump up a couple of stories, you just jump up one story or 10 feet, additional feet. That was a recommendation as kind of a middle ground or compromise by that Downtown Residential Advisory Group. And then beyond 125 feet, it can go up to whatever would be allowed in that zoning district. So obviously, as you all heard this evening and at different points in time as we've discussed this topic with respect to the code, we've had some divergent viewpoints. Obviously, the historic East Side neighborhood would like to see the adjacent lots, particularly in the downtown, be limited to the height allowed in the adjacent residential district, which is 35 feet. The Longmont Downtown Development Authority, in our discussions with staff as well as the board recommendations, they want to allow, consistent with the downtown master plan, allowing flexibility in terms of building heights in the downtown. But don't further restrict building heights than what's proposed in the current draft. We had a discussion with Planning and Zoning Commission last week about this topic at length. Their recommendation was to move forward with the draft as proposed, but also take into consideration appropriate building design and landscaping as part of an overall design for a project. And then obviously on the 17th of April in previous discussions, I know council mentioned an interest in looking at options for protecting those adjacent residential neighborhoods. And that's why we wanted to come back to council this evening for further input from council on this particular topic. So just a few more tidbits on this slide. Just did some quick calculations today. Downtown district, as proposed, the mixed-use downtown district, approximately 300 acres. So those areas that are immediately adjacent, east side of Kimbark, west side of Terry Street, little sliver along the north side of 3rd Avenue, the area of those lots in that transition area, approximately 10% of the total, or about 30 acres. So lot depths, east side of Kimbark Street, 125 feet, plus there's that 20-foot wide alley. And then on the west side of Terry Street, those lot depths are 185 feet, but there is no alley in that particular area. So, a few questions for council this evening. Bear with me for a second.
Are they the same questions that are on the screen?
Yes.
All right. Mayor Pro Tem. All right. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. So, question, should the height transition standards be revised for areas adjacent to downtown residential neighborhoods from what is currently in the draft? That's the first question.
Nobody's in the queue, so let me just a question. Unless somebody wants to go first, I prefer to facilitate rather than chat in this chair. But anyway, nobody's up. Okay, Councilmember Peck.
I didn't want to put you in any
Thank you,
particular-
Councilmember Peck. You saved me.
So my question is, does the 45-foot height include the HVAC and or elevator system on the top of the building?
Well, so in the current draft, if you look, there's some language in there that says that building features referenced as exceptions to maximum height requirements, and that's kind of like the elevator shafts, stairwells, mechanical equipment. It says that shall be designed to minimize visibility to adjacent residential districts and fit within the allowed building height of the zoning district where the building is located to the maximum extent practical. So it's kind of like working with the designer to see if that can be accommodated within that 45 feet. And or if it can't, can it be placed somewhere so that it isn't visible to the adjacent residential area?
Councilmember Martin? Oh, sorry. Councilmember Peck, you weren't done. I apologize.
That's okay. Rather than having the developer work with us, should we not say that the maximum height, including the HVAC and elevator system, is no more than 45 feet? Because it could go up to 55 feet easily with those structures on the top. So,
if council would like to have that, provide that direction, we can certainly incorporate that into the draft.
at this point, I'm just suggesting it, and we'll see what everyone else has to say.
Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. Director Schumacher, could you go back a couple of slides so that we are looking at the picture with the,
Yes.
that one,
Okay.
1 and 2. There's a little exclamation point underneath the left end of number 1 area. Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, that's just a dashed line.
Yeah, it's a dashed line, fine. But anyway, I am not clear where that is with respect to the curb and the lot of the on the residential side. Is it in the middle of the street? Is it in the city right-of-way? Where is that?
That would be on the residential property line.
Where the residential zone becomes commercial, right?
Okay.
On the edge of the residential property line, is that what you're saying?
It's the lot that's zoned residential.
Okay.
Right, okay, so, because it looks like the side of the house, but the front of the house,
Yeah.
but it's really the side of the house facing the street.
You could have different scenarios where you have lots side by side. You could have lots back to back. So we could have a couple different potential graphics that would address different scenarios. But this one addresses kind of a side by side scenario. But it would apply in either instance where if you have lots that back to each other, that 75 and 125 would still apply.
The side of the property line that is nearest the transition zone.
Right.
Okay. And so area 1 there goes across the street, which
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
It could be just the adjacent lot.
Okay, but in
There
most
could
of
be-
our
there could be an-
cases, it is,
yeah.
the street is in there, right?
It
No?
depends. I mean, there could be two lots that, in most instances, it's going to be lots that back up to each other, or there may be an intervening alley, as in the instances on Kimbark Street. On Terry Street, as I mentioned, there is not an alley between what's currently the central business district, proposed mixed-use downtown district, and the adjacent single-family neighborhood. So that interface would be the common property line in that instance. There would not be an intervening street necessarily.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
No, but I'm going to have to go look at
All
it.
right. So, Dr. Waters.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. Just to follow up on that, if this is what's recommended, this is the compromise that's in our materials now.
Yes, this is in the current draft.
And if this picture were to reflect the preference of the historic East Side Preservation Neighborhood Group, what would this picture look like? Would I see? I would see no step up on the second building. Is that right? It would
That's
simply
right.
be 35 feet.
Yeah,
all the way
basically
across.
one would extend across the entire lot.
So the flashpoint here is that 10 feet at 125 feet.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Okay, I'm going to,
Hold on one second.
Could I correct that? It's actually the step up at 75 feet.
Right.
And then it's, yeah.
Hold on one second. Let me just. Oh, sorry. I accidentally cleared y'all. Sorry. Can we just let Councilmember Waters just finish real quick? Sorry, my bad.
So, say one more time, what would I be looking at if this reflected the recommendations or proposal or position of the historic East Side Neighborhood Group?
So the entire adjacent lot in the mixed-use downtown, adjacent to the residential single-family district or the historic East Side neighborhood, the height allowed would be a maximum of 35 feet across the entire lot.
Which is the distance included under number 1.
Right, there wouldn't be necessarily a need for a distance.
I get
if it's
it.
the
But
entire lot.
Yeah, but that's the
Right.
30, the second hash mark is the 35-foot limit, which would extend all the way across.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And another thing to keep in mind, what I didn't realize till today, and I'll elaborate later, but from Emery Street to the downtown Main Street buildings, what the historic East Side wants, Henna's proposal would make it so that there is no step up. It would be a 35-foot cap from their house to the downtown buildings, just because of the distance and the historic preservation of Main Street and all that kind of stuff. And Bonnie, do you mind if we let the Mayor Pro Tem in real quick? All right, Claren, sorry. No, go. Yeah, but I get a call. Councilmember Peck jumped in. We're all jumping in. Well, okay, Councilmember Finley, go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley and Mayor Pro Tem. I understand that sometimes change is hard, and the historic East Side doesn't like change. I understand that. They want it to stay the way it's been. I think this compromise, though, has been agreed to by the Downtown Development Authority, the Historic West Side, the Historic Preservation Committee, just about the compromise that, and the advice of the the consultant that we're paying a lot of money to makes a lot of sense to me. The step up makes a lot of sense to me, and it is indeed a compromise to what we had before. And it does address the specialness of our historic areas. I don't see any need to make any changes to what we have proposed here. That would be my opinion on this. I like that there's a step up. When planning and zoning looks at a building, they look at the shadow studies. So they'll know if a building will pose shadows on, neighboring buildings. They look at that when they look at the development or the building that'll be proposed. I like that there's some flexibility in this, and I think it serves our needs really well and helps clarify what's needed in our downtown area.
Mayor Pro Tem Christensen.
Okay, I'm going to rattle on here for a while. I think what we're trying to do is establish transition zone. And what we have right now is we have Main Street and we have the residential area. And we have one street in between on the east side and on the west side. So unless we're going to make that one street on each side a transition zone with its own zoning, we don't really have a transition zone unless we're going to treat one side of both Kimbark and Kaufman differently than the other side, which I think that's a possibility. I don't see that, otherwise we have no transition zone if you're saying that a building should be the same height as the zoning district where the building is located. Because then you're saying that the commercial zone, the commercial building on, say, Kimbark Street is located in the downtown district. So what does a transition zone mean? I think we really need to clarify that. Secondly, what I would suggest is that we treat the alleyway as a neutral zone, and that since we're talking about the zoning of these buildings as a transition zone, it should be the end of the commercial zone's property, not the end of the residential zone's property. So, in other words, it would exclude the residential zone's end of property and the alleyway up to the end of that commercial zone. The density that we're talking about, we have ample building that could be, we have ample empty buildings here. We have ample empty space that could have been used for, say, this building that we're talking about. But we're trying to set something up for the entire town, so we can't just exclude, just be writing code for one building, obviously. But if we want density downtown, if we want places where people live, as one person said, people are living and people are buying things, well, this particular building doesn't add anything to anybody living in it, and it doesn't add anything to people stopping by and having a downtown experience, because it's a special kind of a use. This could have been developed at the corner of, say, Pratt and Pratt and Main Street. It could have been developed in the old Kmart or the empty Walmart. And so, to me, the density that we need to create should be north of 6th Street on Main and south of 6th Street on Main. 287 is a highway, and that's the place to create density, both in commercial and in housing. And as I've said, we need to kind of put the love into into Main Street from downtown up to the Ute Highway and from First and Main down to Prospect. That's the natural place for commercial development. By trying to use up both sides of this, of Kimbark and Kaufman, we are really extending commercial creep on both sides instead of, in the correct, to my way of thinking, the most appropriate way of extending the density, which is up along Main Street, where realtors have said they have a very hard time selling things because it's not attractive. People don't want to invest in it. And likewise down south of Main and 6th. So to me, a transition zone needs to actually protect the residential areas more than it needs to enhance density. And it also needs to be in keeping, and it really isn't. For these small houses, which don't exceed 35 feet, then to have a building back up to them that is taller and taller and taller as you get to the street. I mean, why not just keep it at 35 feet? That makes sense if it's going to transition up to Main Street. Main Street can go taller, you know? The other thing is the parking, the commercial needs to pay its way for parking. Cotton Burton built his great addition to Main Street, and he not only provided enough parking for all of the residents, but he also created public parking. And I think anyone building parking, commercial space needs to provide enough adequate parking for the employees and the visitors. And it would be nice if they would create some public parking too. We keep, on both east and west sides, we have lots of public events, which are terrific, but I have to walk from my place down to any public event because there's no parking anywhere. The parking when there's an event is used up in all the neighborhoods, but this is particularly difficult on the east side because most of these houses were built before cars were invented, so there are no garages. And a lot of them have added garages, but a lot of them still don't have garages. So they have to park on the street, but they're in competition with commercial space from all the great restaurants and other commercial spaces we have on Main Street. So I really disapprove of the idea that there can be less parking than they need to be, and that they don't need to create parking. All of the commercial spaces create problems with the neighborhoods in terms of privacy, in terms of noise, in terms of parking, in terms of alleyway deliveries. So we need to preference residential buildings that people have lived in for a long time. And we certainly need to enhance downtown, and we value downtown, but it can't override anything, and I think it really needs to start developing north and south on Main Street.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley, and not to be antithetical to Planner Schumacher's statement about planning and zoning, but as liaison and sitting through that laborious conversation, I would not say that there was clear consensus. I believe they really had conversation specifically about punting this to us. So I wouldn't characterize it as clear consensus. As far as we've had previous conversation on this, and I think, I personally will be staying consistent with my views. Part of the point of the code update was simplification. And to me, when we're going 75 feet to 125 feet with 35 to 45 feet step-ups, that's not simplification of process. What's more simple? A full lot. That's very easy. It's very tangible. Also, as far as I've said previously, which, Mayor Bagley made fun of a pyramid effect when I talked about it, but the predominant use of the neighborhood is approximately 25 feet, and saying a transition would be appropriate one story above that, which would be 35 feet, which you still could probably fit a 35 or a 3-story building in my opinion. And as was already previously mentioned in this presentation, we're only talking about 10% of the downtown district. 90% of the downtown district. And I want to make this abundantly clear, I am for density and vertical growth. And those are the most appropriate places for that kind of usage and those kinds of buildings. And so that's why I'm still about the full lot and then 1 story above the predominant use or the predominant style of the adjacent neighborhood. And that's where I'm sitting on it right now. But I'm open to more debate.
Can you actually, so my question for you, Councilmember, just to understand. So what are you proposing exactly?
So a full lot be the transition, not 75 versus 125 feet. We talk the full adjacent lot, and then a 35-foot cap max. If that adjacent since we're trying to tailor this towards the entire city, if the adjacent neighborhood is specifically predominantly 25-foot homes, 35 feet. But if the adjacent neighborhood is predominantly 35-foot homes, then 45 feet, if that's what the predominant usage, if we're going for some sort of aesthetic transition. And so that's why I'm saying it's a predominant use issue, not necessarily a specific prescribed 35, because even though 35 feet is the standard for that residential neighborhood, the predominant use or the predominant style of housing is not 35 feet tall in that neighborhood. That's why I'd like to talk about what's predominant style there. So that's just where I'm sitting on it right now.
Right. Thanks. I just wanted to be clear. Thank you. Before Councilmember Peck and Martin jump back in,
Mayor, if I can jump
go.
in. So we've been working on based on some of the questions you all have been asking, we've actually been working on some graphical displays of those questions to show distances, and if you want, we can try to bring it up on this device, or if you take a break,
sure,
we can see if we can
let's do
connect
that.
this in and make sure we can get it, because I was keying on a couple of questions, and I think this graphic may help.
Okay.
So if you want to.
Before we take the break, I'll ask my other questions after, but something that just dawned on me. If we didn't do anything, and I know we are, but if there was no code update and we were this were 3 years ago, and the realtors or whoever came forward and said, we want to do brownfield development, we're going to raise our building, and we are going to build a new building. How tall could they go if we don't change the code right now?
The existing code would allow 45 feet.
The existing code would allow 45 feet, no transition zone up to the property line, or up to the residential commercial joinder line, right? Okay. All right, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break, 5 to 10. All right. They got to... Councilmember Finley, shall we get going? No? Let's go ahead and get this on the record so we can.
Okay.
All right. So just continuing with my question. So is there anything special in town if you want to let's suppose I want to raise my house, right, in a residential area, and I want to build something new. Is there anything the city can do with the use by right with use by right? Is there anything you can do to say no, you can't do brownfield development? And what I'm asking is, right now, for example, using the specific situation that has led to this, which is really, you've got Ms. Fitzgerald and her husband and other neighbors in close proximity to the current building known as the Longmont Area Realtors, no? Oh, sorry, LAR, Longmont Association of Realtors. And LAR, they want to build a bigger and better building. And so the question is, what are they allowed to do right now? Do they need permission, or does use by right legally allow them to build a 45-foot high building? Is there anything special about brownfield?
Redevelopment, as a redevelopment, no, there isn't anything necessarily special. As long as, so it'd have to go through site plan review, the application. And as long as it can comply with all of the city requirements and review criteria, and there are review criteria and standards regarding existing buildings. We have existing building design standards in terms of compatible building design. We have review criteria that talk about compatible design. But generally, if you can meet those standards and review criteria, you can build up to the allowed height limit within that particular zoning district.
Okay, so
It's 45 feet.
I've got several thoughts on this. The first thought is that anytime I don't understand something, my default is to always go to, well, what have the neighbors already agreed to without knowing that they agreed to it? Meaning, if you move into a neighborhood or you've purchased commercial or residential property or you've been there forever, what does the current existing land use code allow you to do, right? So even though they didn't know it, technically the East Side and LAR there's already rules in place. So now the question becomes, well, what's fair? Well, is it changing the rules or keeping the rules? That's the first thought I have. But then again, when I was talking with some of the neighbors and specifically Ms. Fitzgerald, one of my questions, I have a hard time, and Councilmember Martin, like you, I sometimes spatially can't imagine things. So I like to put everything in context. And for me, my question was, so I office in a 3-story building. And I didn't build that, but the people who bought it essentially went bankrupt because they built too big of a building. And my building is 41 feet 6 inches. And that is a beautiful 3-story building. And so I wanted to know how tall my building was. I mean, is it 55 feet? Is it 35 feet? Just to kind of get an idea of how big of a building we're talking. So, and I think it's a pretty big building. And so, the what? It's right off Main Street, but not in the historic downtown. It's on 15th and Main. So 41 feet 6 inches. And then when I heard that number, I thought to myself, what's special about 35 feet and 45 feet? Right? I mean, is it possible to limit it to 40 feet, still get in three stories, and have the neighbors grumbling and have LAR grumbling, but have everybody go, you split the baby? And so that was another thought I had, because I know that 41 feet 6 inches, you can fit a 3-story building. And but hold on. And then I also think that Council Member Peck's comment of, if you just cap it at if you cap it at 40 feet, for example, and you don't allow for, 15 feet of steeples and gargoyles and all the other things you want to, elevator towers and whatnot that you want to put on top of a building, which we do not have gargoyles on my building. I should. Thank you. I'll check it, And so a 5-foot gargoyle. No, so I mean, I guess as we're sitting here, and so then the third thought I had was, like Mayor Pro Tem, I think it's dangerous to try to apply, a citywide solution to essentially, what comes down to a handful of neighbors, and the people in that picture. I mean, the reason I was like, come on up, everybody get in the historic preservation picture, because everyone in that picture has a dog in this fight, and everyone cares about protecting the historical aspect of this area of town, which leads me to believe that really what we're dealing with are two issues. One are transition zones all throughout the city, because dealing with this issue now all across the city, people in the future who have this problem, they're going to come, they're going to be told the rules, and they're going to go, oh, okay, I can't build a 55-foot high building. I can't build a 45-foot high building with elevator shafts on top. We're establishing the rules. Now, for this particular situation, we didn't even know it was a situation until the neighbors, both commercial and residential, pointed it out, which leads me to believe maybe we should think about it in two different ways. And I think the transition zones, as proposed by the staff for the city, are good and solid. I also think that you can split the baby here in such a way that if you put a cap at 40 feet on this particular area of town, I think that LAR would be able to build a beautiful 3-story building. And I think that the neighbors would find that at least it's not a 55-foot or 45-foot building. And just for the record, I'm looking out and I'm seeing, everyone who has a dog in the fight going, yeah, kind of. So, I mean, those are kind of my thoughts, execute citywide and then split the baby in such a way that the residences are protected and the property rights of LAR are assured. Those are my thoughts. All right, Councilmember Peck.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. Good thoughts, by the way. So I have a couple of questions. First of all, even though these transition zones are going to be over the whole city, I see that the east side is more vocal because most of our residents have HOAs. And the east side and west side do not have HOAs. I don't, to protect them. So they do come to the city when something like this comes up and says, somebody's got to protect our rights. So I can understand that idea. But I do have another question. When somebody wants to pop a top on a home, is there a maximum height that they can do that?
Yes, they would be subject to whatever allowed height limit there is in a particular zoning district, residential.
So what's residential?
So right now it's 30 feet, but it's to the midpoint between the ridge line and the eave on the highest gable. If it's a gabled roof, it's kind of complicated in terms of how it's currently calculated. With this code update, the intent is to simplify how things are measured, and so we're going to 35 feet to the ridge line as opposed to that midpoint between the ridge and the eave. So it'll end up very similar. It's just easier to calculate.
Okay. So basically, that sounds a little bit like what Councilman Rodriguez was saying, in proportion, I think that's the word you used, to the neighborhood. So that transition zones could be different in different neighborhoods, depending upon what that neighborhood's height has been historically. For example, there are 35-foot buildings on the east side. So proportionally, I'm sorry, what was the word?
Predominant use.
Yes, there it is. The predominant use. I think that's a good measurement to go with the predominant use of the neighborhood. Because if you just have this one transition step up idea from 35 to 45, that isn't going to work in the whole city. We have areas where you can put a 10-story building. We could, where the Walmart is. What is this? What is the height of the 17th Street First Bank building? Is that what that is? 6 floors. And that's an appropriate area, Walmart, Kmart, the vacant lot on Longs Peak and Main Street. So those transition areas with just this step up for the whole city, I just don't see that that's going to work for us to build a city the way we want. But to do it in proportion to each neighborhood, I would go with that. And the height of the building, for example, if the neighborhood is 35-foot height, and that is what you would allow a pop-up of a residential to be, a house to be, that should include the parapet from my perspective. So that's what I would vote to do.
Councilmember Finley.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. I just have a question. Since we have height differences for workforce or affordable housing, how would that fit into this picture? If LAR decided to make that affordable housing, what would be the height limit of that building under whatever we decide to do? And how are we going to handle that? That would be a question I would have.
So what happens if we set it at 40, right? Not that we have, but if we set it at 40 and LAR comes back and says, we're going to build a 3-story building, but what can we do if we have an affordable housing element?
So we were anticipating that height exceptions for vertical mixed use or affordable housing would not be eligible in these transition areas.
Okay. I think that's a good idea. Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. I'm just asking for clarification on your thoughts that, were you saying that we would have one transition zone standard for the whole city, but have a special standard for the 8 blocks of downtown?
Like, I guess what I was saying was we would keep the standard citywide as proposed by staff in the LDDA and the Scott Cook with the Longmont Chamber. All the people have spoken in, just say, yeah, let's do that. And then we just say it's a 40-foot height limit between Emory and Main Street. Basically, you're basically taking the area that we're talking about between Emory and the back of the Main Street buildings and just say cap it at 40 feet. Because that's essentially what they're asking for. I mean, when we're talking about 75 feet versus 125 feet, if we grant the residents' request of 125 feet, it's essentially taking everything out of play except for the height limit that they're requesting. And so I'm looking for the compromise, which is something that will allow a 3-story building but without the 45-foot height.
Okay, I think I understand that. So the Historic East Side is actually asking for 35, so you're saying, well, let's give a little bit extra so we can have parapets and...
I'm not an architect. I mean, Tom Moore, I know Tom. He's the architect on the LAR building, and which is why I'm just using my own building. My building's pretty. It's 41 feet 6 inches at the height of everything included. The 3-story building with beautiful 9-foot ceilings, huge corridors. It's a behemoth of a building. It's what? No, it is. No, that's what I'm saying. It is by residences. We actually have residences, but one's probably 50 feet, one's 75 feet. And but that's what I'm saying. It's big enough. What I'm saying is putting my building, a 40-foot building there, is already big enough. And you can fit 3 stories, and you don't need the 45 feet. That's all I was saying. Dr. Waters, or sorry, Councilmember Waters?
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. So I want to just reflect for a minute on Councilman Rodriguez's comments about simplicity. I think there's wisdom in that to simplify this to the one lot and compatible height. If P&Z, if your read was accurate that they want to punt that to us, then we ought to receive the punt and and move forward definitively on this. I would also say this. There was a comment made earlier about process, and I respect that comment and the person who made it. And I want to say to the staff, you've had to deal with a whole bunch of competing interests here, and from my perception, you've done a really fine job. And I started as an observer in the conference room here back in August, watching you kind of grind this out and listen carefully to the council, and you've obviously listened carefully to the community. But I would also say that there are times even perfect process produces conclusions to which experience and perspective and wisdom and values need to be applied. I mean, we got killer bees as a result of a really good process. You put two breeds of bees together and you got a terrible outcome through a really good process. So I mean, I don't want to diminish your work. I'd like to, and I think the way we can add to it now is to be clear on where we want to move forward. So I do favor the one lot and compatible size. And I'm going to think about the staff has to work, in my view, to reach a compromise. Our job is to think about what's the new promise here.
The what?
The new promise. Yeah, the new promise, which is a new promise to the community. That's really what we're doing with this land code update. And the one promise of the new promises is to protect the character of neighborhoods that are pretty unique in this community. And I respect, Mayor Bagley, what you've said about your neighborhood and mine. I love my neighborhood. And there are a lot of things I would go a long way to protect certain things in my neighborhood. But as much as I like it, it does not have the character of downtown. If there had been homes available in downtown when we moved to Longmont 25 years ago, we'd have been downtown. But there was just nothing on the market because of the charm and the attraction of our downtown neighborhoods. I also think we need to make certain we're clear on the promise we're making to downtown development, even if we're limiting it to 35 feet, the kinds of investments we're willing to make financially, politically, policy-wise, and in terms of building support in the community to do the kinds of things we know we need to do from third or from first south or third south to the river and north of 6th, up to Ute Highway. There's tons of opportunity. We need to be mindful and we need to be serious about our commitment to development along that corridor with higher density housing, public transportation, and the kind of commercial space that's going to be good for this community in the long run. Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem?
First of all, I would like to remind you that, Mayor, that the actual motto of that Solomon's decision was to not split the baby. But anyway.
I like splitting babies.
I know. It doesn't really work very well. But anyway, I do think that I would like to put in a word for using the term that Councilman Rodriguez used, predominant use, because that will enable us to think about transitions zones all the way across the city. I think that this particular one that includes, it's a very small area we're talking about, from 6th to 1st and the block of Main, and those two adjacent streets. It's a very small, and it's an anomaly in the town, really. And I think that it deserves its own special treatment because it is a very sensitive area. And a couple of nights ago, I walked from my house over on Judson down to 6th Street to the ex-mayor's pump house, and then I walked down to 3rd, and then I walked home along 3rd and back up Judson. And yeah, I love my neighborhood. It's not it's not a special area because it was fancy. When I moved here 30 years ago, it wasn't very fancy, and it's still not. We don't want HOAs. We don't want people telling us how long to make the grass, and we don't want people telling us anything. It's a nice place to live because we love it, and everybody takes care of their funny little house and their funny little yard in a different way. Sometimes it's really ghastly, and sometimes it's pretty nice. But it's that way because people love it. And so it is a particular area that is only that way because each individual homeowner takes care of their individual home. So it is a difficult area to try to characterize as being like all the rest of the town. But everybody loves their neighborhood, as you said. But I do think that maybe we should, first of all, I think we really need to have some definition of what a transition zone is. And then I think we should maybe treat this a little bit differently. But I would, at least for a start, go with Councilman Rodriguez's term of using predominant use and having it be the whole lot instead of redoing the land code to make it much more complicated than it already is. Make it simple, make it the whole lot, make it start from the commercial lot backward, not the, excluding the alley, and so that it includes the actual commercial zone instead of the alley up to the residential place.
All right, thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. Just since we don't have a motion and we don't have consensus, let's explore that idea just a little bit more. So here's what this is. I'm asking to understand, not argue. Okay, I just want to understand your idea. So, how would it work with different lot sizes, right? How do we determine what the existing lot height is, right? And then how do we apply the new height to the lot next door when there's already buildings there, right? Or maybe they raise the entire lot and they say, okay, well, we're going to build, how high do you determine what the first building on the new lot is? See what I'm saying? Meaning that, like in the historic east side, I'm all for the simplicity. You've sold me on simplicity. Now the question is the lot more simple, or is a number, a length more simple? Because right now you've got a lot, and so as Ms. Fitzgerald's, she handed out that Excel spreadsheet, we've got some houses that we've got one that go as high as 35 feet, or a steeple that's 35 feet or 33 feet, and then you have others as low as 13 feet, something like that, and then you've got an average and all these things in between. So question number one for you, Councilman Rodriguez, would be, how do we determine what the height is in the existing lot, right? And then the next question is, if it's the lot next door, and in theory we're going up 1 story, are we going up by average? Are we going up by 10 feet? 33 plus 10, now is it 43? Is it the average of the first and the average of the second? And if it's the average of the second, and we're building the first house, how do we determine the average when we don't know the height of the others, if that makes sense? So I guess what I'm saying is I'm not against your idea, I just want to understand it, because I'm all for simplicity, but I want to make sure we're simple. And if you can understand what I just asked,
Yeah, that was a really roundabout way of asking that question. So I think specifically when we're talking about transitioning standards, we're talking about existing neighborhoods. So it wouldn't be determining the first house's height built. You're dealing with existing residences. In this case, obviously, in the historic east side or even on the historic west side, we have historic data where we can determine an average height for the neighborhood, which in concept would be close to the predominant height for the neighborhood. If you have that number, which in these established neighborhoods, you will have that number, then you can make a prescriptive height.
So the prescriptive height on the existing lot or block, right? Meaning in the neighborhood. What are we looking at?
Well, I would say there had to be some sort of adjacency. The historic east side, as far as that's concerned, there are properties that are a good 3 or 4 blocks east of this proposed zone. So I would think that you would only utilize maybe the first block and a half in this concept, depending who would be the most affected.
Okay.
If that makes sense. But if you're going into other areas of town, for instance, say your neighborhood where the houses are generally much taller, the average height there is going to give you, again, there's still going to be established data because you live in an existing neighborhood as well. That's going to give you a prescriptive height. As far as the lot standards, our largest lots in single family neighborhoods, essentially speaking, there's not a huge range between them. Because there are lot standards when they are developed in the first place. So, I mean, we're talking somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 square foot lots in concept, but we're talking widths of, say, 50 feet, which I believe is the current standard, by 125 feet to 175 feet, generally speaking, on average. But it just stands to reason that regardless of necessarily the square footage difference between those actual lots, that we're just talking from a stacking point again. It's the pyramid metaphor as you gave it, where that is the point of a transition zone. It is to pyramid. And so that's why I go with the lot, regardless of whether it's a 100-foot deep lot or a 125-foot deep lot or a 75-foot deep lot. It's just the lot because that's generally aesthetically what people see. I think that's generally what we're talking about here is the aesthetic transition, not prescriptive transitions as far as 100 feet, 125 feet, 175 feet, if that makes sense.
But it's by lot, but we're talking about residential to commercial zone.
Exactly.
Right? And so it's not by lot. There's going to be a boundary, meaning a residential to commercial boundary, right?
Well, that's what the transition zone becomes, is that technical boundary, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess my question is, how would you write it? How would you write your proposal into an ordinance?
It would be by lots.
No. But what I understand. But what I'm saying is, how would you categorize the prescriptive height on the existing lot? How big is that lot? I mean, what's the measurement? What's the distance? You know.
That's my argument: is you don't need to have a prescriptive number of feet. Because that way it'll more aptly apply to different situations.
What I'm talking about is height.
Okay, we're going with height.
Yeah,
okay.
When I'm talking about height, first of all, how do you determine height under your proposal? Meaning stepping from A to B, how do you determine A?
So you take the average height of the adjacent neighborhood, the affected neighborhood, and give it that one prescriptive story. It was actually a conversation that was had with the Clarion Associates too, was taking a different approach of feet to actually talking about stories. That was a conversation that was had in the code update. Instead of, they even suggested that might be a tool that we could use, is just talking not about feet, but about stories.
What happens if they want to build 15-foot stories?
Well, it'd be only one 15-foot story above whatever the average height is.
Would you be happy with that, Paula? I don't think so.
Well, that would technically bring you to the 40-foot mark, by the way, just to let you know mathematically.
Yeah. All right, so I'm just trying to understand. Is there any way, what about the idea of kicking this back to P&Z? No, I'm not, no. When I say kicking back, I'm not saying make a decision. What I'm saying is that right now the queue is empty, right? We have no motion on the table. We've got, to instruct staff, we have to give them direction. You know, so it's not, I mean, we need to give some type of direction to staff. Do you have it?
Mm-mm.
No. So I'm not saying kick it back to P&Z and say, tell us what to do. I'm just saying that I don't know what to do. I personally think that downtown, I like the idea of 40 feet and we have a compromise. Okay, but now what do we do with the rest of the city? Even if that's assuming you guys like that idea. So, and I'm not hearing that we have real consensus or any idea of what we want to do.
Can we show you some things to kind of move through this? So, and Brian, you and Don jump in because we've got a lot of screens going right here. So if you look at this location, so Main Street, Kimbark, Emory. So if you zone in, and this is basically going to be the proposal that is in the existing code. You would start measuring from this location. This is approximately, and I stress approximately, 75 feet. And so what's in the code is stating that this is going to match the height here, correct, Brian?
Yeah, that's correct.
Then, at this point, it would go up to the road. How much, Brian?
Well, up to 45 feet for the next 50 feet.
So basically to the curb line.
Not quite, but there's a little gap there.
Yeah, there's a little gap. So that's what's in there. What I heard Councilmember Rodriguez' standpoint was that essentially you would, to give you a different line, you would take all of this and say that is then measured against the predominant height of this area. And that's what the height would be here. And then once you hit this point, then you can go up.
No.
Is that not what you said?
One story above the predominant height in the transition for this lot.
In the yellow line. So you could go one story above the predominant height within this yellow area. Now,
Which is,
for the whole lot,
which is, I mean, what I'm hearing is, but that, what that's doing is even more than what LAR is asking.
So
Oh, I see.
yeah.
it's roughly about 25 feet in that particular block.
Now, I'm going to take you to another place. So here's where the brownstones are located. So this is again approximately 75 feet. Under the way that it's drafted now, this would be 35, Brian?
Yeah,
Or
the first 75 is 35.
The first 75, this would be 35, and then from this point forward, it would be 45. What Councilmember Rodriguez's point is it would be, again, extend to here, and it would be one story above the predominant height in this neighborhood, correct? Now, when you start applying it, this is the other thing that we were looking at. As you all were talking about North Main, we're going to take you to a different location. Don, am I there? Yeah.
Or just 17th of Main is good.
Jeez.
Who planned this place?
Decades.
I'm running out of mouse room. I can't pull it
Build
like
a
I need
gas
to.
station right there.
So, in this case, here's Main Street. Here's a vacant lot. So to give you some, so Main 66, Motel 6, some other buildings, 3 margaritas at this location, vacant lot. If it was applied citywide, then this property off of Main Street would be one story above the, so.
But this is actually on Main Street, which is a corridor.
So I'm trying to, this is getting into how this is all applied, because this is where we're trying to get the direction, to understand, does it, if it's on Main Street, then that doesn't apply. Is what I'm hearing. Is that how it's written?
That would be a transition zone.
Technically, that would be a transition zone.
Technically, it would be that's what I'm saying. Technically, it's a
unless we want to
transition zone.
Yeah, unless we want to exempt
The
out.
transition zone starts right there.
No, there's a single family residence right here. So,
So, again,
and again, so the point is, this is where we're trying to start narrowing in on this, because under the definition of a transition zone in this code, this would fall into that category because there's a single family residential home behind that property.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Well, as I said, Main Street is a public highway, a state highway, and it's what we need, where we need to be developing commercial and dense housing and commercial places. And so even though there are some houses behind there, the bulk of this has already been developed, and this is an anomaly in this neighborhood. None of the other commercial places have adhered to any kind of transitional zone. So I think we're going to have I don't see how we can go back in time and make commercial buildings adhere to something when they're already there. They're grandfathered in, it would seem to me.
This wasn't about the existing structure. This was
Right.
about the vacant lot that's
I know, but I'm saying everything around it has already been built, so it really, I don't see that applying to a transitional zone, because it's not really, there are other houses in back of all these commercial buildings there. That would be a transition house. To me, a zone is like a new development when you're either redeveloping or nothing around there is in existence, like a greenfield thing. But as I said, Main Street is where it's appropriate for us to be developing commercial and high-density housing.
So a different example.
Okay.
So this is, which apartments? This is the Chrisman Park Apartments that
Right.
came for you that touches into the affordable conversation that was brought up.
Right.
Again, by the definition on the way that it's written, this parcel would be a transition zone. And we're saying this because I'm trying to really start defining for staff as we can pull this together. So then this is 3 stories?
Yes.
3 stories in this location. So using that definition at this location, it could still theoretically, because I don't know the height of these structures right here.
Those are 2-story homes, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, all our R1 zoning is 35 feet, isn't it? Up to 35 feet. But it's a different thing, as you said, from the roof line and the eaves and okay.
Now, not to venture in to the policy-making process, but what I've also kind of heard you all say is that you feel that the Main Street corridor needs that potential to develop height and density. I've kind of heard that consistently.
I'd want to argue that a little bit more. I'd want to discuss that a little bit more.
Okay, so because if that's consistent and you said you wanted to keep that here, then theoretically you could say, and now I'm spitballing big time on this one, a block off of it gives you the ability, a block off of Main Street gives you the ability to keep that density and do that type of work, and then the transition zones really are the answer, the block off of it. So where it makes more sense is when you get into this area here, when you see Main Street and the roads start jogging here, so you would say theoretically then in this case, we would like height in this block, but then in this block off of it, as it is touching the residential zones, you could apply that transition zone piece. But then here's a different example in that you have single family homes here, and then you have some businesses in single family, I think, in this location, or let's say, actually, this is the road here. So, Main Street, alley,
yes.
single-family homes. In this area, you have a very similar situation that we talked about on North Main, where that comes into play.
And the other problem that I'm thinking, Councilmember Rodriguez, let's go back to that area right there. that, what you were just right there, is that not the hotel? Is that not like, I don't think it's called the Lamplighter. It's the other
Bar
one.
L?
There's the
No.
Bar L. So there's
Here's
several
the
places
Lamplighter.
that I assume that the Bar L is not going to be around forever. There's like 2 or 3 locations like that. And so why would we designate what someone can build next to it if in the future it's going to be gone? So I guess, Councilmember Peck?
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. To address exactly what you are talking about, I think that this should be a vision for Longmont and what we want this to look like, which in the future, in the next 20 years. And that's what I thought we would be speaking about at our retreat, as to how do we want this to be built out. But going back to the Chrisman Apartments, I know that commercial designation applies to developers who build apartments, because we had this conversation over when they built Renaissance, because people thought that would be a commercial development when they bought into the residences, and it was explained that it is commercial because the developer it's commerce to the developer, if I understood that in the definition. But going back to Chrisman, I don't think that to me is residential, not commerce. So it wouldn't be the same transitional, would it? Would you consider that a transition zone from apartments to residential? Because it's not commercial, in the sense that
No,
retail.
R1, R2, R3 is changing, but you've
Right.
got residential. That's not a zone. My understanding is, in reading the packet and what we've been discussing, is anytime you've got a residential and commercial kissing of the land, the question becomes, what will be the requirements to limit density, specifically height, correct?
I agree, but we were using Chrisman as an example. And that, for me, is not a transition, because it's residential and residential.
That wouldn't.
And,
Good.
and that's what I needed defined as what is commercial, if you're worried about that transition there from residence to apartments.
If I could just interject for a moment. So under the current draft, that transition would apply where you have instances where residential multifamily is adjacent to residential single family or residential mixed neighborhood, because in the draft, the height allowed in the residential multifamily is 55 feet as opposed to 35 feet in the other 2 residential districts. And so that's why we applied that height transition, where you have that interface between the residential multifamily with a 55-foot height and the adjacent residential single family or mixed neighborhood of 35 feet.
Mayor Pro Tem?
This is where I think we need a definition of transition zones, because we're trying to simplify the code. We're trying to add more mixed-use neighborhoods. Well, then, mixed use means mixed use, mixed commercial and residential. And yet we want to have I just don't see the need for transition zones everywhere all over the city, because I don't know how that's possible. We have most of the city already built. And so I'm not clear how we're going to be able to make one definition of transition zones and one kind of clear thing that will fit everything, except, as Councilman Rodriguez said, predominant use, and that will have to be defined by each neighborhood.
Councilmember Martin?
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. What I'm concluding as this conversation proceeds is that, given any of these definitions of transition zone, we would be litigating the definitions over and over again as exceptional conditions happened. So I think that we need to introduce a little bit of innovation in the way that the zones work. As I think Mayor Pro Tem Christensen pointed out, we have a lot of tiny islands of difference in the city, and I don't think we should force a universal definition of transition zone on those tiny islands. So I would propose that we consider a couple of definitions, that we have corridors on the top of the hierarchy, so that, as several people have suggested, if it's on a corridor, a set of rules apply. If it's adjacent to a corridor, then maybe we would have transition zones that apply. Otherwise, a transition zone should need to be a certain amount of acreage or square blocks of consistent predominant use. And that way we would not be fussing around with exceptions. And because our historic east and west sides probably don't, the downtown area isn't big enough to qualify for what I just said, we should make an exception for those, do the protective zones on either side in a way that actually matches the character of the neighborhoods that we're trying to protect, and then do one size fits all after that. So I just would like to say, let's take a shot at that, and as somebody suggested, maybe we should discuss it further at a retreat or at a Friday session, because I think we've reached diminishing returns in this discussion.
And I think that's a good idea, Councilmember Martin. I guess in my mind, I just want to make sure that as I look at this map in particular, that pick any residential area, right? Pick any residential, or just pick any residence. If we enact this new land code, people are going to have use by right, which means they can come in, Walmart, King Soopers, and even though I understand what Mayor Pro Tem's saying, I took my daughter over to college over in Utah, and dropped her off at her apartment and picked her up. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to go show you. It's this massive apartment complex, just massive. And I said, I'm going to show you where I used to live, Danny. And we got in the car and we drove 4 blocks. Then we turned right, and I realized that she does live in my old house. They raised, 12 square blocks and built an enormous apartment building complex. So as we continue to age, we're going to have buildings going away and new ones coming in, and I want to avoid this scenario, where, we've seen it in the past with every time Walmart comes in or every time an apartment building comes in, residents show up and they're like, wait a second, don't do that. Well, if we don't have something universal in place throughout town, what we're doing is saying, if it's commercial or if it's designated high density residential, then you can build whatever you want as long as you're doing it within the code and you're not asking for variances. And so in my mind, when I'm saying transitional zones, it's not necessarily a zone at all. Really what we're doing is telling people who want to develop, whether it's greenfield or brownfield, here are the rules if you're going to build next to someone. And what we're really saying is it's going to go up, in theory, a story, whether it be lot or whether it be a distance. It sounds like, I'm not opposed to pyramiding at all, just so you know. It sounds like that's what council wants, is a way to eliminate the vacillation between mass and height when building next to someone who doesn't have mass and height. And am I correct? Is that what we're saying? And the other thing I have is, going back to what Councilmember Peck said, what's this town going to look like? I don't necessarily want, in 100 years, again, I won't live here, but I don't want to drive down Main Street and have these, 6 to 12-story buildings as we're driving along the corridor. We're purchasing open space for a reason. We constantly say, the whole water debate, was, well, we're only going to have 120 to 125,000 people. Tonight it's dawning on me, are we really moving in a direction where we're going to increase density? Now, granted, that would alleviate the housing prices to an extent, but are we going to be a 300,000, citizen town? Are we going to continue to raise and just build up and up and up and up as we become this metropolis that's surrounded by open space, a moat of land? I for one, don't want that. And so, some of these decisions will, granted, that's far off into the future should that occur, but these decisions are a domino effect that will start indicating what we build. And so as I hear everybody talk, even myself talk, it goes back to process. We have a process. People talked. I think we should embrace it, see what happens based on the experts that have already discussed it, make sure we carve out a piece to protect the historic East Town, and just see what happens, I guess. Mayor Pro Tem?
Well, part of the process, too, is that we're the deciding body. So I would suggest just for tonight, we, since, as Councilman Martin said, we're reaching diminishing returns for everybody. I would suggest that unless anybody has objections to items F through J, that we okay those. I would like to suggest that for item E, we, the draft.
Can you give us a page?
1505, it'd be page 34 of our.
Yeah, page 34 through.
Packet.
Through 36, we didn't seem to have any discussion about that. So we could just say we okay that. The location of off-street parking areas, I think we should make some decision on that, whether we're going to continue to let people not provide parking and let the neighbors take that on, or whether we're going to say, if you want to build a commercial building, then you have to provide an adequate amount of parking for the employees and for the visitors to that building on the lot. And you can either do that by providing it underground, as Cotton Burton did, or by using up part of your lot for that. So I would move that on item E, we amend that to read that commercial buildings must, commercial redevelopment must include adequate parking for the employees and visitors to the building. Do I have a second?
Right.
Oh, we can't make motions.
I guess,
okay.
You know what, I think it's, who was the diminishing returns?
Yes.
I move that we table this issue
Yes.
till the retreat and
Yeah.
actually spend a significant portion of our time discussing this
Yeah.
without microphones and around a table, and allow staff to structure a way for us to engage in this conversation. We can have balls that we can play with and Play-Doh and stuff. But then again, if we don't have a second there either. Okay, all right.
Yes, I think that's a good idea.
All right, Councilmember Waters?
Okay, there we go. If it's the will of council to defer this to the retreat, as I looked at the agenda, I think there are a number of things on that retreat agenda that we won't get to if we spend a whole lot of time on this. That would be my worst fear. As the city manager was mapping out parts of the city along Main Street, there are some worse fears you have that a decision could result in consequences that we're not anticipating right now. So if we're going to delay this, it would be helpful to have 2 or 3 examples. If we moved forward with one lot, to simplify, the one lot and 1 story above the predominant average resident height. if we went that direction, you're looking at a couple of areas where you're saying, be careful. You're not saying it this way, but here's the unintended consequence of that could come back to bite us, and we ought to be mindful of that. It'd be helpful to have an example or two. But so when we get in that conversation, I need to get smarter about what you're seeing in those parts of the community that I don't want to make a bad decision or a dumb decision. And just an emotional decision. I'd like to make a principled decision here going forward, and that would help, as well as a well-informed decision. So,
I think so you all have given us a couple of things we were just talking about that we can come back and actually graphically display. You know, one of the things, and I want to get a bit of a pulse on this, is I've heard this version from some of you all to say, well, if we had this standard and we applied it to everything else and had something different from this area, is that something that council is interested in looking at? Because then actually the recommendation that you all started focusing in on about the lot is easier to implement in that scenario because that area is more uniform. And it doesn't start creating the unintended consequences that I was starting to point out if it was more broadly applied to the city. Mayor, that was one of the suggestions you just came out. So is that something that council wants to see in that graphic?
I'd like to see it.
The other thing is we could take that same concept, and we also heard some council members say, well, we want to look at the main corridors in our community as Main Street and some of those issues. Now, some of the council members didn't necessarily like that idea, but that's an example where we can say, if we take these main corridors, here's the density and the height that can come in, and here's how the transition would look in that scenario. That's another one there's a few more that you picked up. Is that correct, Don? So we can put those together and bring them back and to do exactly what I think we're hearing that you all need as part of this conversation. And frankly, we'll probably go out and even go more in depth and take pictures and do a lot of different things to really give a visual sort of basis for this conversation.
Can we all agree to that? Well, you've got it a unanimous consensus by council. So, which is good that we have the city council retreat agenda next, so we can address Councilmember Waters' concerns. We've got 3 people in the queue. Is there anything, are these comments based on process for what we're going to be doing? All right, Councilmember Peck?
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. Actually, mine is more of a direction comment. Can we possibly treat the LDDA, and this may be what you've already said, but I want to make the comment that if we go with the 1 story above the predominant area, this would give the LDDA the ability to use Main Street, those historical buildings, to go up 1 story right on Main Street for a loft or whatever. They're historical. They may apply for grants or go through the Historical Society's compliance. But if we use just the LDD area to do 1 story above the predominant area, I would like us just to do that tonight, to give guidance, if we can do that.
I saw a staff member in charge of historical areas going like this.
No.
Why were you going like this?
Pardon me? Not all.
Karen Bryant, it's just 5th through 3rd within the national district that could affect, you can't really go for, it would be very difficult to go to the State Historic Fund or grants to get anything to go vertical on those historic structures from 3rd to 5th.
Okay.
You can typically only use grant funding or tax credits on the actual original building portion of it.
Oh, thank you for that.
Councilmember Rodriguez?
Thank you. Just to add on a little bit, not every building on Main Street is a historically designated building, so so on those buildings, I believe you could go up. So anyway, this is a timeliness question as far as the continuance of this conversation. Would the staff be able to get that to us? Just because I know that the retreat butts right up against what's supposed to be the first reading of this. If there's any way that we could get that on Friday, as far as your graphic representations and do that during our study session, our Friday morning work session, as opposed to making it a retreat issue? Or is it not enough time?
That's probably not enough time for us to get that to council. I mean, we're really at the point where now we're pushing the schedule out in terms of the introduction of this in order to get through these issues. So it won't be introduced. We're now pushing out in time.
Okay. Well, that's not a good thing either. All right, that was just my question.
Councilmember Martin?
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. I would just like to put a context around all of this to raise the bar a little bit. We are trying to be visionary about the future of Longmont. And I'd like to suggest the metaphor that our historic neighborhoods, and I include the 6 blocks of historic downtown in that, as well as the east and west sides, are already facets of the gem. We would like to come up with codes that protect the polished facets and give us a basis for turning the rest of the city into an equally marvelous gem, although different. And as opposed to just allowing safe but hodgepodge kinds of development. We would really like this. What we want is that the resulting city be beautiful. That's it. Just want to say that.
All right, so we'll talk at the retreat. All right, speaking of, let's go ahead and talk about the City Council retreat agenda.
Members of council, Sandy Cedar, Assistant City Manager. I have put in your packet a draft retreat agenda that does not include a land development code conversation, not that that can't be part of it. But I did want to just kind of share with you what I heard and what this reflects. But essentially, on day one, really talking about the big picture. What are your big goals? What is it that you want to accomplish while you're on council? And then how do we create that into sort of a city council set of goals? We'd like to share with you the results of the Envision Longmont budgeting information that we have around the polling of what the community is looking for as far as their priorities, and try to put together sort of a big picture vision for what the council is moving towards. In the afternoon, we talked a little bit about how do you measure your success and how do we take a look at that when you finish these goals? What does that look like for you? And then adjourn for a family dinner at the Callahan House. Saturday, we kind of talk a little bit about, are there some particular directions that you want for city staff to go? We have lots of implementation plans that go along with Envision Longmont and will likely go along with the ideas that you all have for what you'd like to accomplish. We can review those. We can talk specific metrics. We did want to have a conversation about your expectations around council presentations. And all of that is changeable based on what you would like to do. We could turn Saturday into more of a work session around the land development code, if that would make more sense for you. We would still be able to then have that big picture conversation on Friday and bring some of that information back. It is very flexible, whatever you would like to see as part of the retreat.
Seeing nobody in the queue, I guess the definition of a big, hairy, audacious goal is one that defines our organization. For example, you're Kimberly Clark, and you say, you know what? We want to make Kleenex synonymous with the product category. Meaning so that, hey, could you hand me a Kleenex? Everybody reaches for a tissue, even if it's, made by Kroger or whatever. That is a big, hairy, audacious goal is so big that it's like, it drives the organization, because it's not like, well, let's build a rec center, or let's build let's figure out what we're going to do with the historic east side. Those are goals, right? Mm-hmm. And in my mind, the conversation we were having, whether it be, I've talked with Dr. Waters, for example, and he mentioned, the First and Main, figuring out what we're going to do there. And then the conversation tonight, I think that, what we're talking about is the future of Longmont. That is, I think, that's as hairy as it gets. What would our community look like? And that means coming up and finally endorsing a land use code that sets the vision. And so to me, as I just look through the agenda, I mean, you can get rid of, linking big, hairy, audacious goals to Envision Longmont, Jeopardy, reviewing priority-based budgeting, all that stuff. And let the record reflect that Councilmember Finley wants to do Jeopardy. But I think we should clear out 4 hours on Friday and start talking about, have staff bring forward, well, this is what we could do, not just with transition zones, but this is what the city would look like with these transition zones. And under the current option, under Councilmember Rodriguez's proposal, other best practices of cities around us, what happens if we implement each of these, and you've got the 120,000 cap, and what would that increase? Just talking about that would be extremely not just useful, but I think necessary to our community's future. Councilmember Peck?
I agree with you on all of those, Mayor Bagley. And on Friday at 2 o'clock, linking the big, hairy, audacious goals to Envision Longmont, that is part of the code update, is that we are linking that to Envision. So I don't think we need to have that 2 o'clock discussion. What do you think? I think we can get rid of that one.
I want a chunk of time.
Yeah.
I want 2 till 5. I want a chunk. Dr. Waters?
Thank you. I've already given Sandy my feedback on the agenda in terms of sequencing and whatnot. So, but I do think one of the comments I made to Sandy is we ought to have adequate time. That if I'm only on this council for 20 months or whatever, the next 20 months for me and for all of us are going to be driven largely by what happens on this weekend. So having adequate time on Friday to be as clear as we can on what it is that's going to drive us for the next 20 months, that's the basis hopefully for the next 20 years, right? That if we could be clear enough and achieve enough consensus on a differentiating vision for Longmont, then this may be this whole discussion about whether the last tweaks in the code become clearer or easier, but more precise or more connected to that vision. But I do think this is the one opportunity that with you all I'm going to have, and that we'll have together maybe, to craft a vision that pulls from Envision Longmont. All the half a dozen areas in Envision Longmont all have references to vision statements. In my view, none of them is a vision statement, but they're the seeds there that we could grow into a vision. But this is a chance for us as a council to get clear on what differentiates us from all the other communities in the Front Range, that puts us top of mind. That people say, where's Boulder in relationship to Longmont? Not where's Longmont in relationship to Boulder, right? That's what I'd like to do with the morning, and then build whatever we need to around that. So we come out of that saying, we would sacrifice together for this. We'll lead this community. As leaders, we'll work in the community to build support for this vision, whatever that is. Yeah.
Councilmember Martin?
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. I just want to add that last week I had a conversation with Director Joni Marsh about cross-referencing Envision Longmont and the sustainability plan to the code, and I think that is something that could actually be done by the staff who knows the proposal like the back of their hand, and bring it to us so that we can say this is not emphasized heavily enough, this is overemphasized. What are the date goals on this? Because to me, that's the thing that we're really lacking with the Envision cluster of documents, is that they don't have a date certain, none of them, for when we're going to get there, or any definition of done. And I would like to be working toward a definition of done, but I think based on the way Joni reacted to it when I said, well, oh yeah, of course we could have been building a cross-reference for you all along. do that, bring it to us, and then we'll talk about it at a policy level, which is, are we giving the right weight to these goals, and what's the definition of done?
And to be clear, just one thing that came to mind as we're coming into the retreat, I know that staff, well, how did Joni put it? She's finished her assignment and she's out of money, right? And so that's an important piece to remember. I don't want staff freaking out. I mean, in my mind, it's really about going in and having a communication and talk about, well, what are these final pieces of the code going to look like? And what programs, policies, and directions do we take to take Envision Longmont and just make sure it comes to fruition? Mayor Pro Tem?
I don't know whether we should do this at the retreat, but we should do it somewhere, somehow. It seems to me that we have as a group, we have a difficult time giving clear direction to staff. Again and again and again. We talk and we talk and we talk and we talk, and then we think, well, maybe we'll put it off till next week. And it just makes it more of a nightmare for staff, because then there's more stuff to take care of. So at some point, I think we need to discuss or perhaps get lessons on decision making. Just, we have to make some decisions to move forward. And I think sometimes we are lacking in that because we want them to be perfect or really good, certainly. But we have to make some decision to move things forward. And if it's flawed and if it seems to be a mistake, then we can change it. But in order to move things forward, like the affordable housing thing, we have to make a decision. And for instance, well, tonight, because it's a study session and we can't make a decision, I wanted to at least move part of it forward, that we could move forward, so we don't keep having the same discussion over and over again. And so I don't know how to approach this, but some kind of discussion about hearing from staff, perhaps, on how difficult our non-decision making is for them might be helpful. But for all of us to also discuss how we do make decisions. Yes, it has to be made based on data, but it also has to be made on the moral purpose of government. What is the purpose of government, and how does government make decisions? That's our job, and that's what we should discuss at some point.
I'd be open for that discussion. It's just, I'm a big believer in you don't act until you have clarity, and it's better to be right than fast. But it sucks not to have clarity. I wish I had clarity in all kinds of instances in my life, and it stinks to be staff right now. But do you have enough direction to at least come up with rewrite an agenda and let us talk?
Well, I think if we accomplish one thing out of this, and this is sort of going to be a challenge for all of us as staff and for you all as council, because I agree, when you talk about a big, hairy, audacious goal, it is something that defines an organization. In this case, it not only defines an organization, it's what's going to define a community. And so what I would say is, when we talk about this land use issue, it is a component of what that bigger goal is that you all are looking at. And so what I would say to council is when we go in that morning, what is it that you view will be defining our community in the future, so that when people think of Longmont, they think of this, and this could be, and again, I'm just picking things that I have seen in conversations, but what is the broader vision for First and Main? What do you all envision that as 20 years from now, and what's that going to look like? Or what is the area in, the industrial area of our community that really hasn't developed? What is your vision for that? Think big.
The east side.
Think big.
Industrial, no, just kidding.
Then that As we think big, then we will pull down, and then that's where these land development codes start falling into that, because it's operationalizing the big and how we're going to get from the here, you say here, go charge this hill. We will then define the mechanisms to charge that hill to achieve that broader long-term vision for the community. So my challenge is think big. Don't be afraid of how long it's going to take. Don't be afraid of how hard it's going to be. And then we will start working to those pieces. That's how I would define that morning conversation. Then what we do is when we start talking about the other pieces, and it may be that afternoon, it may be the next day, but we're going to say this is how it starts fitting in to envision or into priority-based budgeting, because then we will take that, and as we get into the budgeting system, that's what I'm going to look like as we're going through those financial processes to say, you've set this big vision, here's how we're going to operationalize it. I don't know if that's what you all were saying, but that's kind of, I think, what would really help us.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Well, when we're talking about the big picture goals, I think that can all those 3 bullet points can be condensed into just, I really don't think we need to discuss what will be our personal mark on Longmont, because I think everyone on this council just wants Longmont to thrive, and everyone here who lives in the city to thrive. I think what we need to be discussing is what are the advantages Longmont has, and how can we maximize those? And what are the disadvantages or the problems that Longmont has, and how can we find solutions to those? And what are the say, as you said, 2 or 3 or maybe 5 or 6 goals that we can all agree on, that we want to solve, and we won't, or do the best we can to work towards solving it. We won't solve them in 20 months or 3 years or 4 years, but we want this to be in good shape for the future governance of Longmont and for the citizens of Longmont. So if we can agree on some of the challenges and some of the advantages we have, and how we can make best use of our advantages to solve some of our problems, to me that would be very useful to discuss in terms of the big picture goals.
Councilmember Martin?
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. I would just like to express my thanks to the staff for what Manager Dominguez just said. Because if you have a willingness to put up with a council that has aspirations to be visionary about this city, then that takes tremendous courage for a group of people who are responsible for keeping the lights on and the streets paved to take on. So I'm moved by that, and thank you.
All right. Look forward to having this conversation continue at our retreat.
Mayor Bagley?
Yeah.
Can I really just ask for one more little bit of clarification?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So I can't bring this agenda back too many more times because the date will be here and we want to get you the information that you want ahead of time. So what I'm hearing is on day 1, we have one morning conversation that talks about the differentiation that Longmont will be in the future. What will define us into the future? What will define the community? What are the types of things that you see as the vision of the community forward? That is the only conversation until lunch. After lunch, I heard one vote for Jeopardy. It's up to you all.
Jeopardy's
Jeopardy,
fine.
okay.
That's 2 votes for
It's
Jeopardy.
something fun after lunch. We'll keep Jeopardy, and then what I heard in the whole afternoon was how do you link what you just talked about to the Land Development Code? And then Saturday is something else. Maybe that's still the conversation around council communications. In my mind, we just leave the morning open for where we are. Does that work for you? I see 1, 2, 3.
Councilmember Waters? Try it again.
I think I'm doing the right thing here. I think I would not want to lose a conversation about how are we going to measure. I mean, the definition of done is important. And what are we going to measure, and what are we going to hold ourselves accountable for to make progress towards finished? Or even a tiny step or two towards big vision over the next 20 months. What has to be in place for the next council, whoever that is, under the mayor's leadership? And I also want to acknowledge the challenge that represents for staff, but I have no doubt we're up to it. But I would not want to lose what and how are we going to measure to hold ourselves accountable to the community, to the staff, to one another. So
Do you want to do that on Friday afternoon and move land development code to Saturday? Spend as much time as you'd like
Or
on
maybe
the
Saturday measurement?
Saturday.
You'll have a sense of what the flow is going to be like. I just think I think it'll be missed, because I do think vision's going to have to turn into some goals for us, and we don't have to drill it down to measurable objectives. I'm going to be comfortable saying, bring back what you think to be the kind of objectives and how we're going to measure those, or let's talk about how we'll measure those over the next 20 months, so that the next council can pick it up, in 2019 and run with it. But I think I don't want to lose that. I think it'd be a mistake.
So vision conversation in the morning, land development code in the afternoon, measurement, and your expectations of staff's council communications on Saturday.
With occasional fun, food, and squishy things thrown in.
And so when I say
Some jeopardy.
when we say land development code in the afternoon, what we say is tying into Envision. That then brings the land development code piece as part of that, correct?
I'm not sure that's what I heard. Say that again into the microphone.
Big ideas. We tie into Envision Longmont and other plans we have and land development code. Then Saturday comes into the measurement piece and those other options.
Yes, I see 2 or 3 nods. I don't see them all. I said, there you go. Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I just wanted to comment on that, because I do think that we haven't been, I think we need to be, as Councilwoman Martin and Dr. Waters have brought up the idea of measurements and benchmarks, and I think that's something that will give some consistency to a lot of people who appear before us. But we should also have a discussion of what we mean by success and by measurement, and there are different kinds of measurements, things that are not particularly measurable but nevertheless are very important. Anyway, but that will be a good discussion.
And Mayor and Council, we will include the Envision Longmont Sustainability Plan, the implementation, the action steps with what dates they're already there. We'll include that in the packet along with the accomplishments and work plans.
Thanks, Sandy. Do I have a motion to suspend Council Rule of Procedure 25B to consider formal council action regarding legislative items House Bill 181352 and House Bill 181419? Let's vote. All right, that passes unanimously. All right, and Councilman Martin, you're not in the queue, but do you want to make some motions? Or no? Didn't you, my understanding was that you wanted to. No, we just moved it to suspend the council. So what we want to do is make a motion now to support the House bills.
Yes, okay. And I move to support the 2 House bills.
And I will second that.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, let's vote. And that passes unanimously. All right?
Thank you.
Time for mayor and council comments. Can we clear the screen, Don, so I can see who's in the queue? Yes, yes. All right, Mayor Pro Tem. Thanks for all the work, Paula.
Good night.
I just want to say to all fellow gardeners out there, bear with it. Everything's coming up. It's beautiful. You may have dirty fingernails, but it's worth it.
Seeing nothing else, let's go on city manager remarks.
No comments, Mayor, Council.
City attorney.
No comments, Mayor.
All right, this meeting's adjourned.